Mm. He said it the way someone might mention the weather. Casual. Unbothered. Like he hadn't just asked me to hand over everything I had spent 31 years building. My son-in-law stood in my kitchen with the yellow curtains I sewed myself and the crack in the tile near the stove that my late husband Harold always said he'd fix, and he told me I had two options: sign the house over to him and my daughter as joint owners, or find somewhere else to live by the end of the month. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember that detail specifically because everything else went quiet in a way that didn't feel real. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, this man named Spencer, who I had welcomed into my home 6 years ago, whose wedding I paid for because my daughter Marlene said they were short on funds, and I nodded once, slowly, like I was considering it. I was not considering it. But Spencer didn't know that. Spencer had spent 6 years watching me absorb things quietly. He had decided that quiet meant weak. He was wrong about that. He had been wrong about a lot of things. I need you to understand what this house means before I tell you the rest. Harold and I bought it in 1991. We were young and broke, and the inspector found termites in the basement, and we bought it anyway because we loved the porch. That wide front porch with the two steps that creak on the left side. Harold said he'd fix those too. He never did, and after he passed, I decided I didn't want them fixed. I liked hearing them creak. It meant someone was coming home. I raised Marlene in that house, and my son Darnell. 2 kids, 2 different personalities, same set of values, or so I thought. Darnell moved to Portland years ago, married a woman named Faye, and calls me every Sunday without fail. He offered to fly out when things got bad. I told him not yet. There would be a time for that, but it wasn't yet. Marlene was always the complicated one. Brilliant in school, dramatic about everything, needed to be the center of whatever room she walked into. I loved her fiercely, and I also spent a significant portion of her childhood exhausted. When she brought Spencer home, I thought, well, at least he's calm. He was calm the way still water is calm. You can't always tell what's moving underneath. They got married. They rented an apartment across town. Things seemed fine. Then 3 years ago, Marlene called me crying. Spencer's business had collapsed, some kind of consulting firm he'd built with a partner who, according to Marlene, had stolen clients and drained the accounts. I didn't ask too many questions. I said, "Come stay with me while you get back on your feet." That was my first mistake. Not because I shouldn't help my daughter. I would again, but I should have put something in writing. I didn't because it was family, and I trusted that the word family still meant something. They moved in on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Spencer had rearranged the living room furniture. I told myself it was nothing, a preference. People have preferences. I told myself that for a long time about a lot of things. When Spencer started taking calls in my office and locking the door, I told myself he needed privacy for his work. When Marlene stopped eating dinner with me because Spencer eats late, I told myself they had their routine and I had mine. When Spencer mentioned, very casually, that the guest bathroom needed renovating and maybe I should think about using the one in the master bedroom, I told myself he was just thinking about the house's value. I am 67 years old. I have been on this earth long enough to know when I'm being managed. I just hadn't decided what to do about it yet. What changed things? The first thing, the thing that made me stop telling myself it was nothing, was a Tuesday morning in March. I woke up early, the way I always do, made my coffee, and came downstairs to find a woman I had never seen before, sitting at my kitchen table with a folder full of papers. She introduced herself as a realtor. Spencer came downstairs a few minutes later in his robe, looked at me, and said, "Oh, Mom, good, you're up. Renata is just going to take a quick look around, give us a market value estimate. Nothing serious." Nothing serious. I set my coffee cup down on the counter. I looked at Renata. I said, very politely, that I wasn't aware any listing decisions had been made regarding my home, and that perhaps she should reschedule. Renata looked at Spencer, smandled. He said, "She gets confused sometimes. About the details, I am not confused. I have never been confused." But I understood in that moment that Spencer had decided to tell a particular story about me, and that I needed to take that very seriously. I asked Renata to leave. She left. Spencer said I was overreacting. Marlene, who had appeared at the top of the stairs at some point, said nothing. That silence told me everything I needed to know about where her loyalty had gone. That same afternoon, I called a lawyer. Her name is Gloria Hutchins. She's been practicing estate law in this city for 22 years, and she does not waste words. I sat across from her desk and told her what had happened, and she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as unsurprised, and she said, "Let's talk about your options." We talked for 2 hours. I didn't tell Marlene or Spencer where I'd been. I said I'd had a doctor's appointment. Spencer said, "Everything okay?" in a voice that suggested he mostly hoped it was, for logistical reasons. Over the next 3 weeks, while Spencer continued to act like the host of my house and Marlene continued to choose her daily battles with me over things like whether the hallway light should be left on, I worked quietly with Gloria. We set up a revocable living trust. We documented everything: the original deed, Harold's death certificate, every mortgage payment from 1991 until the day I paid it off in 2014. Gloria advised me on exactly what I could and could not do, and more importantly, what Spencer could and could not do, no matter what he believed about the situation. I kept going to my book club. I kept tending my garden. I kept making my coffee every morning and watching the sun come up over the back fence. Nothing about my surface changed, but I had stopped waiting. The conversation that ended things happened on a Friday evening in April. Marlene had made dinner, which was unusual, and it was a good dinner, which made me more cautious, not less. Spencer poured wine. He said he wanted to have a family discussion. I said I was listening. He told me that the house was too big for one person to manage alone. He said that Marlene and he had been thinking about the future, my future, and that the most responsible thing would be to formalize what was already happening, them living here, contributing to the household, by transferring the deed into all 3 of our names. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment. Not anger, not even surprise. What I felt was a very specific, very cold kind of clarity. I asked him what contributing to the household looked like, since neither of them had offered $1 toward any bill since moving in. He said that their presence was its own contribution. He said it like he believed it. Marlene reached across the table and took my hand. She said, "Mom, we're just trying to make sure you're protected." I looked at her hand on mine. I thought about all the mornings I'd driven her to school, all the recitals I'd sat through, the way she used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and press her cold feet against my legs. I thought about Harold and what he would say right now, and I knew exactly what he would say because he was never a complicated man. He would say, "Don't you dare." I told them I needed time to think about it. Spencer said, "How much time?" I said I wasn't sure. He said, "Because we're not going to be in a holding pattern indefinitely. If you're not willing to make this official, then maybe it's time to think about whether this arrangement still makes sense." There it was, the threat under the dinner and the wine and the hand-holding. I was being told that if I didn't hand over partial ownership of my own home, I would be pressured out of it. I looked at my daughter. She looked at the table. I said goodnight, and I went to my room, and I sat on the edge of Harold's side of the bed, and I thought about the next step. I called Darnell that night. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Mom, what do you need me to do?" I said, "Nothing yet, but I need you to come in 2 weeks." He said, "I'll book it tonight." I love my son in a way that defies description. I always have. The next 2 weeks were the most deliberate of my life. I met with Gloria twice more. I had a long conversation with my doctor, not because there was anything wrong with me, but because I wanted her documented assessment of my mental clarity on file, given that Spencer had already started telling people I got confused about details. My doctor looked at me and said, "Irene, you are the sharpest patient I have seen all month." I asked her to write that down. She did. I began quietly removing things that mattered to me. Not furniture, not anything obvious. The box of Harold's letters in the closet, my mother's jewelry, the folder of financial documents I kept in the filing cabinet in my office that Spencer had apparently been going through, because 2 folders were out of order in a way I had not left them. I photographed everything. Gloria advised me to. Every room, every piece of furniture that had been moved, the crack in the tile, the porch steps. Darnell arrived on a Thursday. Spencer was visibly uncomfortable the moment he walked in. Darnell is not a small man, and he is not an unobservant one. He looked around my house and I watched him take stock of everything that had changed, and his jaw tightened in a way that reminded me so much of Harold that I had to look out the window for a moment. We had a family dinner. It was strained. Spencer was performatively generous with the wine. Marlene tried to smooth everything over. Darnell was polite and said very little and watched everything. That night, after Marlene and Spencer had gone to bed, Darnell sat with me on the porch and I told him the full plan. He listened. When I finished, he said, "You already handled it, not a question." I said yes. He reached over and squeezed my hand and said, "Dad would be proud." I said, "I know." The following Tuesday, a letter arrived by certified mail. Actually, 2 letters arrived, one for Spencer, one for Marlene. Gloria had prepared them. They were formal, professional, and entirely clear. They stated that Irene May Coleman was the sole owner of the property at this address, as documented by deed and supported by established trust. They stated that the current occupants had no legal claim to the property and no rights to make decisions regarding its sale, transfer, or modification. They stated that the current informal arrangement of residency was hereby terminated and that the occupants had 60 days to make alternative housing arrangements. I was sitting in the garden when they opened them. I had timed it that way. I could hear them through the window. First silence, then Spencer's voice climbing in a register I'd never heard from him before. Then Marlene's voice higher, saying my name. I kept deadheading my roses. They needed it. Marlene came outside. She was crying. Real tears, not the kind she used to negotiate. She asked me how I could do this. I told her I hadn't done anything to her. I had protected myself from something being done to me. She said that wasn't fair. I said a lot of things weren't fair. Spencer bringing a realtor into my home without my knowledge wasn't fair. Being told to sign over my house or leave wasn't fair. Being described as confused to people who had no reason to believe that wasn't fair. She didn't have an answer for that. She sat down on the porch step, the one that creaks on the left, and she cried. And I let her because she is my daughter and I love her, but I didn't take it back. Spencer came out a few minutes later. He was quieter than I expected, and that told me he had already consulted someone, mentally if not literally, and understood that he had no ground to stand on. He said that this was not what he had intended. I said I understood that people don't always intend the consequences of their actions. He said that he'd hoped we could handle this like family. I said I had handled it like the legal owner of a home, which I was. He went back inside. He didn't look at me again that day. They were out in 44 days, not 60. 44. Marlene called me twice in the first week, both times to cry and ask if I was sure. I told her both times that I was sure, and that the 60 days stood, and that when she was ready to talk, actually talk, not to change my mind, I was here. She didn't call me the week after that, or the week after that. Darnell stayed for 10 days. He helped me move the living room furniture back. He fixed the steps on the porch, both of them, and I told him to leave the left one, and he looked at me and understood without me having to say more. I have lived in this house by myself for 4 months now. Every morning I make my coffee and I watch the sun come up over the back fence, and I sit with the quiet, the way you can only sit with quiet when you've earned it. The yellow curtains need washing. The crack in the tile is still there. The left porch step still creaks when someone comes home. Harold always said he'd fix it. I'm glad he never did. I want to say something to whoever is watching this, especially if you're in a house that feels like it's no longer yours. Especially if someone has started making small decisions and you've been telling yourself it's nothing. It is not nothing. It never was. You do not need to fight loudly to win. You do not need to match anyone's anger or their lawyers or their certainty. You need to know what belongs to you, document it, and find one good person who knows the law and will stand in your corner. I never raised my voice. I never had a dramatic confrontation. I deadheaded my roses and I let the letter do the talking. The house is still mine. The porch is still mine. And for the first time in 3 years, when I hear that left step creak in the morning, it's just me. That is enough. That is more than enough. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out what it actually taught me. Not the legal part. Gloria handled that. Not the practical part. Darnell helped me move the furniture back. The part I keep returning to is simpler than any of that, and harder to put into words. Spencer didn't become who he became overnight. Neither did Marlene. What happened in my house over those 3 years was a slow accumulation of small choices. His to push, hers to look away, and mine to absorb things quietly and tell myself they were nothing. Every one of those choices had a consequence. His choices built a false confidence in him. Her choices hollowed out something in our relationship that I'm still not sure will fully grow back. And my choices, the silent ones, the patient ones, built something too. They built a record. They built time. They built a case. That's the thing about how actions actually work in the real world. Outside of movies and revenge fantasies, there's no dramatic moment where the universe swoops in. There's just the slow, honest accumulation of what you do and don't do, and eventually the weight of all of it lands somewhere. Spencer believed he was winning because I wasn't fighting. He mistook my stillness for defeat. That was a failure of his intelligence, not mine. I think about what it took to stay quiet in that kitchen when Renata was sitting at my table with her folder. Every instinct I had said to raise my voice, to demand an explanation, to let him see exactly how angry I was. But anger without a plan is just noise. I had spent enough years watching other people spend their anger and come away with nothing but the memory of how loudly they yelled. I wanted more than that. I wanted my house back. That required thinking more than feeling, at least in that moment. And that's what I mean when I say this is about intelligence, not cleverness, not strategy for its own sake, but the discipline to understand what you actually want and then figure out the most direct path to it. I wanted to stay in my home. I wanted my rights documented. I wanted Spencer to have no ground to stand on when it came to it. So I worked backward from that and did only what served those goals. Everything else, his tone, his presumptions, Marlene's silence at the dinner table, I filed away and kept moving. The hardest part was Marlene. That part isn't resolved. She's called twice since they moved out. We've talked carefully around the edges of things. I don't know what our relationship looks like from here. I know I love her. I know I will not pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I've learned to hold them without needing to resolve them into something tidier. What I want to say to whoever is sitting somewhere right now feeling like the walls are closing in, like the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones doing the harm, is this: your stillness is not the same as your surrender. Knowing when to move quietly is not weakness. It is one of the most difficult, most underrated forms of strength there is. You can grieve what happened and still protect yourself at the same time. You can love someone and still hold the line. I earned this quiet. Every creak of that porch step, every morning cup of coffee, every rose in my garden, I earned it. Not by fighting louder than anyone else, by knowing what was mine and refusing, in my own way, to let it go. That's enough. That has always been enough.